In a massive automotive factory, there was a technician named Arthur who was the epitome of hard work. For 12 years, Arthur stood at the same station on the assembly line, tightening bolts. He was so dedicated that he could do it with his eyes closed. His movements were a flawless dance of muscle memory. He never arrived late, never took an unscheduled break, and his error rate was 0. However, after a decade of perfection, his salary had only increased by a meager cost of living adjustment. He was a master of a low-value task. Then came a young intern named Leo. Leo was only at the station for 3 months before he stopped tightening bolts altogether. He spent his shifts observing the rhythm of the entire line, taking notes on a tablet. He realized that the manual bolt tightening process was the primary bottleneck of the factory. Instead of working harder to tighten more bolts, Leo designed a simple, automated hydraulic jig that could do the work of 5 men with 10 times the precision. He patented the design, sold it to the corporation for a 6-figure sum, and started his own automation consultancy. Arthur is still there, tightening bolts with perfect form, wondering why the world hasn't rewarded his loyalty. The logic of marginal returns is brutal. If you are working at a low-skill ceiling, your effort has a diminishing value. Most people believe that more effort equals more wealth, but in reality, linear effort only leads to linear survival. If you are just a better bolt tightener, you are still just a bolt tightener. You are trading your finite life force for a fixed wage. True non-linear leaps happen when you stop doing the work and start designing the system that does the work. Arthur practiced tactical diligence, he did the job well. Leo practiced strategic intelligence, he changed the job itself. If you find yourself exhausted at the end of every day but your bank account remains stagnant, you are likely trapped in a low-margin loop. You are using your sweat to mask your lack of a plan. Stop looking down at the bolts and start looking up at the assembly line. Wealth doesn't come to those who work the hardest, it comes to those who figure out how to make the work obsolete. 3 years ago, a prestigious university held a massive career fair. Thousands of graduates in tailored suits stood in lines that stretched for blocks, all hoping for a chance to interview with Big Four accounting firms or FAANG tech giants. Among them was a student named Sarah. She looked at the thousands of competitors fighting for the same 100 spots, and realized that even if she won, she would be just another replaceable cog in a massive machine earning a standardized salary. She walked out of the fair. Instead of following the herd, she moved into a cramped apartment and began studying an obscure technical niche of AI ethics and decentralized data security, topics that most people at the time called useless or too risky. Her peers mocked her for wasting her degree on a field with no job listings. Fast forward to today, those same peers are facing massive layoffs and stagnant wages in overcrowded industries. Meanwhile, Sarah is a top-tier global consultant, being paid 5-figure speaking fees and massive retainers because she is one of the few people who spent years mastering the very empty space that the rest of the world has suddenly realized is the future. The geometry of opportunity states that the thinnest margins are always found in the thickest crowds. If everyone knows where the gold is, the gold has already been dug up. Most people are terrified of being wrong or looking stupid, so they stick to the red ocean, the markets where the rules are established and the competition is fierce. But the elite understand that alpha, excess profit, only exists where there is a perception gap. You find the greatest leverage in the boring, the complex, or the unpopular sectors. If you are doing what everyone else is doing, you are guaranteed to get what everyone else is getting: mediocrity. High-level flipping doesn't happen in the middle of a trend, it happens at the edge, where the light hasn't reached yet. Don't go where the fish are being caught, go where the water is deep, quiet, and currently ignored. Where there is bias and misunderstanding, there is an opportunity for a non-linear leap. In the same neighborhood, 2 childhood friends, Ben and David, received a small inheritance of $50,000 each. Ben was a man of traditional virtue. He was afraid of debt and believed that slow and steady was the only way to win. He put his $50,000 into a high-yield savings account and continued to live in a small rental, saving every penny of his salary. After 5 years of extreme frugality, Ben had saved another $50,000. He finally bought a modest apartment in full, with his $100,000. He felt safe because he owed nothing to anyone. David, however, understood the logic of the fulcrum. He took his $50,000 and used it as a 10% down payment on a $500,000 multi-unit property in a developing part of town. He borrowed the other $450,000 from the bank. The rental income from the other units covered his mortgage and taxes. 5 years later, the property value had risen by just 20%. To Ben, 20% would have meant a $10,000 gain on his savings. But for David, that 20% increase applied to the entire $500,000 value, creating $100,000 in pure equity. David sold the property, paid off the bank, and walked away with $150,000, tripling his initial investment while Ben was still just saving. Saving money is a primitive strategy. In the modern financial matrix, wealth is not about how much paper you have in a vault, it is about how much leverage you can control. The bank's money is the long timber that allows a small amount of your own capital to move a massive asset. Most people view debt as a monster because they use it to buy liabilities, cars, clothes, vacations. But the master of leverage uses debt to buy assets that pay for the debt. This is the difference between being a slave to interest and a commander of credit. While the honest saver is losing purchasing power to inflation, the leveraged player is using the bank's resources to capture the growth of the entire market. You don't need $1 million to start $1 million project, you just need the fulcrum of a solid credit score and the lever of a cash-flowing asset. If you only ever use your own two hands, you will only ever have what two hands can hold. Learn to use the strength of the system to build your own weight. In the aggressive world of retail trading, there were two men, Tom and Marcus. Tom was a diligent news watcher. Every morning, he sat with his coffee and watched the major financial networks, waiting for the breaking headlines. He read the popular newsletters and followed the top picks from famous analysts on social media. When a major tech giant announced record-breaking quarterly earnings, Tom saw the green candles on the screen and hit buy with everything he had, believing he was riding the wave of success. However, within 2 hours, the stock plummeted. Tom was wiped out, left wondering how good news could lead to such a massive loss. Marcus, on the other hand, had exited his entire position in that same company 3 months earlier. Marcus didn't watch the news. He spent his time in specialized industry forums, talking to supply chain managers and middle-tier engineers. He had picked up on a subtle signal. 3 top-tier developers had quietly resigned, and a key supplier in Taiwan had just reported a massive drop in orders for a specific chip. Marcus didn't need the official report. He had already read the shadow data before the CEO even walked into the boardroom. The logic of information asymmetry is that capital always flows from the low information valley to the high information peak. If the information you are using is available to the general public, if it's on the TV, in a viral tweet, or in a mainstream newspaper, it is already priced in. By the time the average person hears the news, the elite have already made their money and are looking for someone to buy their expensive shares. Tom wasn't unlucky, he was just at the bottom of the food chain. To achieve a non-linear leap, you must stop consuming public noise and start building private intelligence. This isn't about illegal insider trading, it's about industry depth. It's about being in the rooms where the real work happens, understanding the mechanics of a sector so well that you can see a turn coming while everyone else is still looking at the rearview mirror. If you know what the crowd doesn't, you don't need luck, you just need patience. The harvest belongs to the one who hears the wind before the rain starts. 2 startup founders, Kevin and Simon, entered the market with very different philosophies. Kevin was a perfectionist. He was terrified of failure and spent 2 years meticulously planning his first product. He refused to launch until every pixel was perfect and every potential risk was neutralized. He spent all his capital on a single massive bet. When the product finally launched and failed to gain traction, Kevin was devastated. He had no money left, no energy, and his dream died with his first attempt. Simon, however, understood the logic of the barbell. He didn't try to be perfect, he tried to be fast and cheap. He launched 10 small, different experiments in 6 months. 8 of them failed miserably. 1 broke even, but the 10th experiment, a simple tool he built in a weekend, caught fire and grew by 1,000% in a month. Simon didn't care about his 90% failure rate. That one single winner didn't just cover his losses, it made him a multimillionaire. The world's most successful players don't aim for a high win rate, they aim for a high expected value. Most people are paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, so they only take safe bets with tiny returns. They are essentially playing a game where they can't lose much, but they also can't win big. This is the safety trap. In a non-linear world, 1 home run pays for 1,000 strikeouts. To jump to the next level, you must increase your loss tolerance. You have to be willing to fail small repeatedly so that you can win big once. If the cost of a mistake is $1,000, but the payout of a success is $1 million, it is mathematically insane not to keep trying. The key is risk control. Never bet so much on one attempt that a failure takes you out of the game. If you can stay at the table long enough to let the odds work in your favor, you only need to be right once to change your life forever. While the perfectionists are still checking their maps, the experimenters have already found the gold. There was a loyal employee named Robert who worked as a middle manager for a stable logistics company for 30 years. Robert was the king of consistency. He arrived at 8:55 a.m. every day and left at 5:05 p.m. His career trajectory was a perfectly straight, gentle slope, a 3% raise every year, a slightly better cubicle every 5 years. He was safe, but he was also stagnant. In the same city lived his former classmate, Julian. Julian's career looked like a disaster for the first decade. He hopped from one struggling startup to another, often taking pay cuts and living in small apartments. Then came the node. Julian saw a tiny, chaotic company that was trying to solve a specific problem in cloud infrastructure. Everyone told him it was too risky, that the founders were eccentric, and that he should stay at his solid job. Julian ignored the noise. He quit his stable role and joined the startup as one of the first 20 employees. He worked 18-hour days for 4 years, holding onto a small pile of equity that most people said was worthless paper. In the 5th year, the company went public. Julian's worthless paper turned into $20 million in a single morning. The logic of critical nodes is that 99% of your time is maintenance time. It is the baseline effort required just to stay in the game. But the wealth of your entire life is determined by the 1% of moments where you choose to jump. Most people treat life as a linear ladder where you climb one rung at a time, but the world is actually a series of step functions. You spend years gathering energy, building skills, and waiting in the shadows. Then, a window opens for a split second. If you hesitate because you are worried about your 3% raise or your safe cubicle, the window slams shut, and you remain at the baseline forever. The elite understand that you don't need to be ON every single day. You just need to be all in when the node appears. You are not paid for the 30 years of showing up. You are paid for the one courageous decision to abandon the shore when the tide was right. Stop looking for a steady climb. Start looking for the explosion. In a high-performance sports academy, there was a runner named Elias who had a dream of winning the Olympic 100-meter sprint. He was incredibly hardworking, training until his lungs burned and his legs shook. But no matter how much he optimized his start or refined his stride, he could never break into the top tier. His muscle fibers were naturally more slow twitch than fast twitch. In a 10-second race, he was always a fraction of a step behind the genetic freaks who were born for explosive speed. He was a failure in the world of sprinting. One day, a coach watched Elias keep running long after the sprinters had collapsed in exhaustion. The coach realized that while Elias lacked burst, his body was a furnace of endurance. He convinced Elias to stop competing in the 100-meter dash and move into ultramarathon trail running, races that lasted 100 miles over mountains and through mud. In that world, the explosive sprinters couldn't survive the first hour. Elias, however, became a legend. He didn't just win, he dominated, because he had moved into a game where his weakness was the only rule that mattered. The logic of resetting is simple. If you are playing a game where the rules favor someone else's DNA, you are destined to be a high-level loser. Most people are currently competing in standardized games. They are trying to be the best accountant, the best salesman, or the best manager, using the same metrics as a million other people. They are fighting for scraps in a theater where they are just supporting actors. A non-linear leap happens when you stop trying to win the existing game and start redefining the victory condition. You have a specific set of inconvenient traits. Maybe you are too obsessive, too quiet, or too rebellious for a corporate office. In a cubicle, those are flaws. In a niche startup or a creative empire, those are unfair advantages. Don't spend your life trying to fix your shortcomings to fit someone else's script. Instead, find the wilderness, where your specific flaws become the secret sauce. When you define the rules, you don't have to fight for first place. You are the only one on the track.